Hi there. Thanks for joining CPG Bytes, a series of short video segments from Treasure Data, where we chat about the latest news and industry trends and read between the lines to provide our perspective and insights. So David, my friend, what do you have for us this week?
Well, I got to watch a really interesting webinar that actually Treasure Data and Consumer Goods Technology had put together about harnessing the power of analytics to drive reciprocal value for consumers, which is kind of a hard thing to roll off the tongue, but it was actually really, really fascinating. And we'll have a link to that here for others if they want to watch it. But basically, they were talking about how can CPG companies provide this reciprocal value back to consumers to, in a value exchange for information, essentially, right? Because at the end of the day, getting that first party data is super, super important, as we know, for CPG companies. But people are kind of like, well, wait a sec, I don't know if I want to give my information away, and there's some reluctance. You need to be able to provide some sort of value back to the consumer. And what I found fascinating is, when I hear the word value, I'll be honest with you, I tend to think of things like discounts, right? Like, what are you going to give me monetarily as value? Which is certainly is value, right? That is one way to think about it. But in the webinar, there was a discussion about other types of value. So, for example, it could be expertise, right? Providing information about product or about some kind of a capability that a consumer would value. And they also provided this really fascinating example that I had never really contemplated, and that was with Starbucks and the Starbucks app. And the fact that it's so easy to use and it's so seamless, it shows that Starbucks values the consumer's time and is respectful of that. And it shows in a way that's a value, right? It's kind of, not explicit, but it's an implicit set of values. So I thought that was really, really interesting, that part of the discussion. And then the conversation sort of pivoted a little bit, and they talked about, and this is kind of the second thing I took away, is how important having that first party data and this data integrated from all these different sources together. And CGT did a study, actually, I think it was with Treasure Data earlier this year around data and analytics. And I forget the number, something like 45% of people said that data integration is like a huge priority for them, but everyone struggles with it, right? And there's a number of reasons for that. But one of the key points that the speakers made is that you have to have a data strategy to drive that data integration, and that you have to have almost from a top down. If it's a bottoms up, it's probably not going to work. You need to be thinking about this as a strategic investment and as a platform. And one of the thoughts they had was around as you're building out the business case around this, don't think about just the value for marketers of that integrated data. In fact, I think it was Jessica mentioned that the value could be larger outside of marketing. And they talked about customer service as an example. And it made me think of an example. This was probably about 10 years ago. I was doing some work for a yogurt manufacturer, and they had a problem with packaging, that the lids were not sealing up real well. And customers were calling and complaining about this, but that data never reached anybody in the brand and in manufacturing. And when all was said and done, they had to recall a lot of product. And let's just suffice it to say, it was millions of dollars of a problem, right? That could have been solved if that data had been integrated and people could quickly have seen that call center information. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And then the final point I took away from it was the fact that at the end of the day, this is all about humanizing the experience, right? Like, marketers need to be thinking about not marketing as a way of selling something, but it's about building a relationship. And that's all about having that empathy and that humanizing sort of element. I think, Stephen, you and I talked about this in some of our previous CPG Bytes. And, Danica Konetsky from Treasure Data mentioned that it's not about understanding consumer behavior. It's because consumer behaviors have changed, but consumer expectations are what have really changed over the last few years. And when they're talking about this humanizing, they talk about almost thinking about, it being like dating, right? If you meet somebody and they text you 10 times in one day, it's going to kind of freak you out, right? So it's almost more important, not what you do, but what you don't do. You have to really understand the timing. We've talked about this. It's not just the right message to the right person. It's the right message at the right time, right? That's so important. And that's all part of that humanizing aspect of this. So at any rate, it was a really interesting webinar. And I thought the experience, I think Jessica was a executive at Chewy, and Carol had a number of really good, senior leadership positions at a number of companies. Of course, Danica, I work with Danica at IBM, and she's just a wealth of knowledge, having worked at ConAgra and Kraft. So it's a great webinar, I think, for people to listen to. But if they want to save a little bit of time, those are my three takeaways: this reciprocal value, kind of thinking about it more broadly, not just sort of monetarily, to think about your data strategy. Data integration is not just the connection point and not just the technology. It really has to be a strategy and should be top down to really drive success. And the last piece is to really think about that humanizing the relationship you have with your consumers.
Totally agree, David. And obviously we talked about reciprocal value is that I'm willing to give you my information in exchange for something that I treasure, in exchange for something I deem valuable. That's why I'm willing to give you my information. And that's kind of what they was talking about. And the data integration, they brought up another really good example, which it happened in a real life company where they actually had a marketing promotion, a campaign that was to move more products at a company. And the good news is the campaign was very successful. So they were able to move a large amount of products in that short amount of time. However, the data integration was not quite there yet. So they couldn't inform the suppliers to say, hey, listen, we're going to do this marketing campaign. Please ramp up your supply so we can meet the demand. Which ultimately happened was the marketing campaign was so successful that they sold out everywhere. And they actually had to cut the campaign short because the suppliers just wasn't in the know. They couldn't ramp up, and there wasn't enough supply for them to meet the demand of the campaign, which was a bummer because the campaign was ultimately successful, but they had to cut it off because they just couldn't supply quick enough to in anticipation of that campaign.
Yeah, it's like, dear VP of marketing, I got good news and bad news. The good news is the campaign was super successful. The bad news is the campaign was super successful.
So exactly. So, but that was the case, and of course, you can call your customers consumers, or if you're B2B, you can sell to enterprises. But at the end of the day, we're all humans behind the screens. And you gotta treat your customers as humans. What do they need? What are they looking for at that moment? Dating is a very primitive example, but dealing with them with the need that they're looking for at the right time is what everybody needs, whether it's a company or a person. And we are there to build that relationship. And that's kind of the special thing about us humans, is that we have this bond with each other that can be enforced, that can also be weakened by bad experiences. But if you have a good experience with something, then you have a preference towards that, and that's what we want to build ultimately. That is actually something tangible called brand loyalty. So, that to your point it's really interesting that they are able to take all these data is something very, very intangible, but transforming that into something tangible, something that the companies can see in their financials, is kind of what people are doing with customer data today.
Absolutely. So anyway, it was, like I said, I thought it was a great discussion. So well worth people's time to watch.
It was, and thank you, David, for all the insights today, and definitely we will include a link for you to go and check out the webinar. It's now on demand, so you can see that, you can watch that at your leisure. And for more videos like this, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to turn on the bell for all notifications. And we'll be back in 2 more weeks with more topics for CPG Bytes. Talk to you soon.
Thanks. Bye-bye.